Hello everybody, it is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Well, I'm very excited for this specific video because we're not necessarily going to be talking about something that's actually new, but it's not necessarily something that is old either. But I think what really excites me about this specific television show that we're going to be reviewing today is that it is an anime based on a Western comic book. You know, it's not really something that happens often. So the fact that we have East and West meeting together and commingling in a beautiful way makes me very excited. As a matter of fact, one of the few things that I am very excited about in the world of comic books is the fact that we're going to be getting a Western comic book about a television show from the early years of anime. Mad Cave Studios and Cullen Bunn are going to be giving us a series on Gatchaman, which is a legendary anime from 1972. But today we're going to be talking about a living legend. We're going to be talking about a writer who I have known about for many years, and the more I read his work, because I'm diving into it a lot more often these days, the more he becomes one of my most cherished and iconic writers in my world, and that, of course, is the great Mark Millar. Mark Millar is someone who I had read some of his comics, but I had not really invested in his Millarworld when I was younger, nor was I reading Millarworld when I first got back into comics in 2019, but I always appreciated him for what he was, because one of the other things that I really love about Mark Millar is that his stories truly do transition well into other media, because I love Kick-Ass. I love The Kingsmen. So knowing that he had done this big deal with Netflix, and that a lot of his Millarworld creations were coming to Netflix in live action and animation, I mean, there's still so much more that he could bring to us, I just got all the more interested in reading the pages of the Millarworld comics. And when his big event from summer of 2023, The Big Game, came out, and that was basically giving us all of the Millarworld characters in one crossover event, and I loved it, not even knowing much about them. Now that I'm backtracking and reading things like Superior and Nemesis and Huck, I'm just loving Millarworld. So I had to talk about the 2021 anime show Super Crooks, based, of course, on the 4-issue miniseries. So Super Crooks is a very easy story to explain. Imagine Ocean's 11, but these are lovable supervillains. It's the story of Johnny Bolt, who is a kid who grew up loving comic books, and then he realized, you know, if I have superpowers, why do I have to be the hero? Because there's enough heroes in our world today. And he becomes a supervillain, he befriends other supervillains, and one of his things that he just loves to do, like the great Jimmy Conway from Goodfellas, he loves to steal. So this is the story about how he meets the gang that would eventually be called the Super Crooks, led by Carmine, who was a supervillain from the glory days, and they pull off one of the most incredible heists in the world. And the most interesting thing about it is that it's all about them taking down the biggest egotistical villain of them all, which was called the Bastard. So the comic book doesn't really go deep into the forming of Super Crooks. As a matter of fact, the 4-issue miniseries is only about them performing the heist on the Bastard. So this is a 13-episode series where we actually get a backstory. As a matter of fact, the first 10 episodes of Super Crooks is an entirely new piece of the story, and it's how Johnny develops his powers, how he goes on a couple of small-time heists, and then eventually he meets Carmine, and he and his girlfriend Casey decide to create this truly unstoppable band of supervillains. And some of these supervillains are incredible, like the Diesel Twins and the Ghost. There are just so many things to love about Super Crooks, and I think that's because of the fact that what Mark Millar does so well is he gives you characters. He gives you characters with so much dimension and so many layers, and you just either truly fall in love with them or you truly despise them with all of your heart. So I love that we got the origins of the Super Crooks, and then when you really thought the story was going to come to the end, you actually get the story that takes place in the pages of the 4 issues of the comic book. So I was really glad that they didn't stop, even though they could have stopped with the backstory, and then they could just say, go read the Super Crooks comic book to see what happens next. And everybody would have still probably been hunky-dory, but the fact that we even got the story in anime form was awesome. And I'm also really happy that Mark Millar decided to go in the anime direction and not just do Western animation. I just feel that the fluidity of the art was perfect, and it was such a fun show. I truthfully had an insanely good time with it, and I'm really upset about the fact that I didn't see it when it first came out during the pandemic, because there was a lot of good word of mouth behind this show. Now, not to say that I didn't know that it exists. As a matter of fact, I went and watched the live-action Mark Millar show, which was actually very closely connected with Super Crooks, and that, of course, was Jupiter's Legacy, starring Josh Duhamel and Leslie Bibb. And I am planning to rewatch that show as well as read the comic books, because it's so interesting to know that Jupiter's Legacy and Super Crooks are 2 entirely different stories that take place in the same world, and it's incredible how different the atmosphere and storytelling of both of those stories are, because I have to read the comics of Jupiter's Legacy because I liked the television show a lot, but I want to give it a rewatch as well because I would like to actually give you guys a review here, because that's what we do here alongside talking about comic books and manga. We talk about movies and anime and cartoons that revolve around the world of comics. So I would say that if you have not watched Super Crooks, if you are a fan of the book and you go check out the anime, it's great. You're going to love it. It goes right along with the comic book. If you've never read anything from Mark Millar, forget about that. If you enjoyed Kick-Ass, if you enjoyed Kingsman, you're going to love Super Crooks. I really think so. But even if you have no interest in comic books or comic book movies in general, and you just want to see a great show about awesome heists and the people who are doing the heist just happen to be supervillains, you're going to have a great time. It's a winner, guys. I enjoyed it, and I still cannot get the theme song of that show out of my head. So those are my thoughts on Super Crooks, guys. Please leave your comments in the box below. I would love to chat with you about it, and I'll see you in the next one.